Welcome to the Real Estate Talk podcast with myself, Oliver Ingalls, and my esteemed co-host, Benji Weinberger. If you take anything from this podcast, if you take any hints or tips, we would love for you to like, subscribe, and please share.
Wow.
That's
so lazy.
Oh, you're not going to want to know.
So you use your daughter for business.
But I used to do a particular pose.
What is the pose?
It was like
Can you demonstrate?
There was literally a stain on the floor from when the man had died, the previous owner, and he hadn't been found for 4 weeks.
You're like some weirdo that just loved death.
I've never publicly discussed the thing. A decision was made for me that ultimately I wasn't that happy with.
We have an epic guest on today. We have Sian Louise Tangney.
Sian Louise began her real estate career in 2017 at Douglas & Gordon. In 2018, she was awarded highest volume of letting deals before transitioning across to Knight Frank, where she won the award of Newcomer of the Year in 2023. And she has a BA Honours in Performing Arts, which she has used to leverage and now get a fantastic social following of just over 21,000.
Sian is leading the way as a single mother and entrepreneur. Since joining Knight Frank in 2022, she was quickly promoted to the head of Battersea and Riverside sales. And within 2 weeks of starting her business, she closed on a £5 million house here in Marylebone. Let's do it. Sian Louise, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the hottest day of the year so far.
With no AC in the room,
AC,
with windows closed.
Secretly sweating, but now everyone knows about it. So thank you so much, guys.
Look, no, it's a pleasure. We have been really excited actually for this podcast. There is some brilliant nuggets which I know you're all going to give the people watching. But first of all, as we always do, we like to rewind and go back to Sian Louise of 10 years old. Tell us a quick snippet of where you were, what you were doing, and your kind of schooling background.
I would relate everything to who I am today, basically from my parents giving me the upbringing that they did. Both of my parents came from very, very humble backgrounds and ultimately worked their way to a point where my sister and I managed to have a really good upbringing. My dad managed to be on the board of directors of one of the biggest corporate companies in the UK at the time when he was working there, and my mum run her own business. So growing up in my household was like this mental business environment where our dinner tables were, the conversations around the dinner table were about building business, how to hustle, how to earn money, how to get to the next thing. We were all very involved in the building of the business of the family.
Love that.
Which relates into, even when I was in school, I always had some sort of side hustle of some point. I was just that girl. You would, we used to do this thing at school where they'd have a charity week every second week. So one form group would sell sweets and I'd always go on the last day and haggle all the sweets down. And then for the next week, I'd be selling the sweets out of my locker. And like, I was just that person. That's who I've always been.
It's wicked.
When it came to obviously being a little bit older, I was holding under 16 nights and I was selling tickets and negotiating with the nightclubs that that's fine, you don't have to serve alcohol because everyone here will be under 16. And I was making an absolute mint for a 16-year-old holding these underage nights. Yeah. But school itself was actually really difficult for me. When I got into year 8, so I was probably about 13, 14. I went to an all-girls school, which is brutal. And I was in a friendship group that was probably the naughtier friendship group within the year group. Yeah. And by the end of that year, every single one of my friends had either been asked to leave the school or they'd moved to a different school. Wow. My best friend even being moved out to boarding school. So I felt super, super isolated during that time. I grew up as a performer, going to performing arts classes every day after school. I was on every sports team. I was at county level for every sport that I did. And I was super, super sporty. But my day-to-day in school was super, super difficult for me once all of my friends left. And I really suffered with mental health with that, right? So my parents noticed that within me. My confidence was absolutely to the floor, like I wouldn't look anyone in the eye. I remember I used to get on the train and I didn't feel worthy enough to have a seat on the train, so I used to stand in the corner and like look at the floor and hope that no one, like, it was like super bad in terms of how I felt about myself. So my mum sent me to drama school as well as the performing arts, which kind of just boded into everything that I ended up getting into. I was super lucky in terms of the drama side of things, because I then started to get qualifications with acting exams and things like that enabled me to have enough UCAS points that I went to uni really early. So I actually went to uni when I was 16.
And wait, so just when
Wow.
when do you
like we fast tracked so much.
Didn't even know that
when
was
do
a
you know
thing.
what age is it normally? Is
18.
You normally 18.
So effectively, and that's so sixth form.
So
when someone would normally go sixth form,
So I did my GCSEs and then I went to uni.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's because I got enough UCAS points from drama exams because of everything else that I'd been doing.
Yeah.
That I was essentially able to get a place on the course.
Amazing.
So it was great. But I went to a performing arts, not a uni, they call it like a performing arts school, right? So it's super, super different to anyone else's typical university experience. Okay, so you're in a ballet class at 8:30 every day, and you're doing back-to-back physical dance classes or singing lessons or drama lessons, and your day finishes at 6:00. And
long
it's
day.
It's brutal. It's absolutely full on. But because I had such a sporty background, that was a very natural thing for me. But ultimately, by the end of the second year, it's a 3-year course. By the end of the second year, my body was finished. Yeah, I was 18, but I'd been dancing since I was 3. So my body was just in a really bad way. And I had substantial enough injuries on my shins that doctors told me that I couldn't dance anymore, right? But I was halfway through this course, which meant I had to still continue to dance in order to come out with my BA. So my third year wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I ended up streamlining into a more musical theatre field. Musical theatre is for some people. It's not really my bag, I must be honest, right? And I was at like true stage school. So anything that you've seen in the movies of like people running around the corridors like singing and living their best life. This was my life,
Wicked.
Right? But that was
You were singing when we were doing the testing.
testing. That's why she's not singing now. So it was like all singing, all dancing, all prancing, musical theatre college. But I ended up streamlining more into like the straight acting side of things.
Do you think, can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about education systems with different podcasts, and everybody has kind of had a similar line of, I didn't really get on with the actual education system, kind of rebelled against it, and found their niche, throughout the course of either schooling or just after schooling. And it feels like you had that similar path too. I mean, I find it amazing that you had parents who spoke business, because I bet that has helped you, especially now, running your own business, leaps and bounds with the information that you learn. But do you feel that the education system now needs to adapt?
Yeah, so I think it's case per case, and I think it's child per child, right? For me, I went to a very academic school. Okay, so I was an A and B star student, right? So I still did very well in terms of the academics that I came out with. But my passion wasn't for sitting in a chemistry room and learning the periodic table. Like, what is that going to do with my life, right? So then when I ended up having my own child, I had really strong thoughts of her actually being home educated, because my preference for her would to be learning about things that are going to enable her for her future in her life.
Yeah.
But also I want her to be able to do her passions. Like, I was very good at art, I was very good at textiles, and I was sewing and things like that. But there's only so many hours a day that the school would have allocated for me to be able to do that. If, for instance, my child has a passion in those things, why can't she do that for one day a week? You know, and then maybe ultimately, because I got into art uni as well, and I decided not to go down that route, and I went to the performing arts uni instead. You know, I wonder whether I'd have just spent more hours doing that thing.
Yeah.
Would I, you know, be an interior designer now instead of it? You know, it's how does that play out into your future? The reason ultimately I didn't end up sending my child to do homeschooling with her is because I'm a single parent, she's the only child, and I do believe that there's a really strong social element that you get from being in a playground and being in a school that I can't teach you, that ultimately will give her more life skills, because people who are successful in life, it's all about creating relationships.
Yes.
How is she going to create relationships if it's just the two of us?
Yeah.
You know, she needs to pick that up in school.
100%.
But are you not then concerned, having gone through what you went through with your social crowd, that you lost them all when they all left, and then you know, were struggling? Are you not concerned that there could be a repeat?
It's already happened. So she goes to a super international school. She goes to school in London, super international school. She actually, for my sins, sending her to a private school. And so with so many high net worth individual leaving the UK, the 3 families that we have got the closest to since she started school in September are all leaving in the next 2 weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's just in her class, right? Across all of the school, there are so many families who are leaving. For me, because she is experiencing this at such a young age, it's a bit of a norm.
Yeah.
I went to school in a much more residential area in South London. She's going to school pretty much in central London, right? So it's more normal for her that, on the school holidays, this person goes to this country and this person goes to this country, because that's where their families are. So she has a very different understanding of it all than I would have then.
Which I think is epic as well. I mean, look, this podcast won't just be about parenting, but I agree entirely with what you say. You know, part of the people who are going to be successful in the future are the people who are going to be able to communicate and build relationships with a multitude of demographics. And I think it's amazing that she's already being exposed to, people from every part of the globe, and having that experience, which is amazing. And I actually resonate a lot more with the acting side. When I was young, again, very similar in terms of, I used to have really bad acne, and again, got to the point where, a bit like you on the train, you don't want to speak to anybody, didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to go down to watch football or anything like that. And my mum and dad sent me to an acting class.
Really?
Yeah. And it again just brought out of me this whole level of passion and doing plays and being part of a real core team and stuff like that, which I love. So I resonate a lot with that. And it's great to have that in your life, to really boost those skills, which I would have never have had if I wouldn't have done it.
I think drama in general for kids gives you life skills that you don't get in a classroom. You have to stand up in front of a class of however many people and say your monologue, or you have to just put yourself out there. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable. And ultimately, that's what makes you grow. All the people who are successful, that's how they succeed.
Yeah.
And it gives you the confidence.
Okay, so your third year of your the Royal the ballet, not ballet school, but the performing arts school, okay, and doctors obviously come in, said, Sian Louise, you're not going to be able to do this as a career. How does that hit you? Because I presume at the time you were like, okay, you were going to be going off to do West End shows and maybe being film, and how did you feel when you had that conversation?
For me, that was one of the core memories of my life that I'll never get over, because I recall sitting in the doctor's office and he just delivered this piece of information so off the cuff in terms of either, you have surgery now, which I couldn't because of the course I was on, I couldn't come out of it, or you stop dancing. And you're saying that to someone who has been dancing since they were 3 years old, and every single day after school I'm training, and that was my whole existence up until that point. So it hit me like an absolute punch in the face, ton of bricks, like, you know, as bad as it could have hit you. But ultimately, because going back to my foundation of my parents and the type of household that I've been brought up in, you just push through. Like, you know, if that avenue's not working,
you find another.
Pivot, right? Find it, like, find another, find something else, find your niche. If that's not meant to be, then fine, but you're going to be successful. Maybe that's not the avenue. Find what you're going to be successful at. And where I had that passion in acting, actually, when I left uni, I was one of the first people who left the course to be employed. And it was acting in a musical theatre show, but I wasn't doing the rest of it. I was just a straight actor in it. So you just always find a way. And I actually got that role. I met the producer of that show that I was auditioning for because I was making clothes as a side hustle, and I was making clothes for this performance, and I met a producer who I was auditioning for her show in 2 days' time. I said, "Oh, I'm learning the script for that audition at the moment."
Wicked.
And I'd have never met her if I hadn't have been
Right
making
place
the
at the right time.
clothes. It's everything is connected. Yeah.
Okay, love that. So, okay, what happens next? So you do the show. How do you transition then into property? How do we come around to this?
Yeah, so the show itself went on and off for a couple of years, and I was the lead.
Of course.
I just said,
Just drop that one in there.
in case you wanted to know where I was. What ranking
Brilliant.
I was in the show.
I was the star.
I presume it wasn't like recorded so that like the people watching can't like find it somewhere and
You know,
and
there are
ether
some
somewhere.
recordings, but I really hope that no one can find them. I've never publicly, since I've been speaking about being an actor previously, I've never publicly discussed the things, because at the time I thought I was, you know,
Best thing since sliced bread. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've made it.
Honestly, but seriously, as I was coming out of the show, some nights I was coming off, like people were making me fan mail and people were making me artwork.
You were signing.
People were asking me to
like,
sign stuff. So, and I was getting pats coming out of the fit. Like, I honestly thought I was.
You're it.
Yeah, I was the next big thing.
Love that.
And ultimately, I was waiting around a couple of years, on and off with this show for a couple of years. Doing again a million side hustles in that process. And then it got to a point where I realized I wasn't going to be an Oscar winner.
You sure the hope still might be there though? You never know. You could get picked up after the
Someone might watch
producer
this
watching
podcast,
this today.
Be like, there she is.
There she is, the star.
The one that got away.
So at the time, as one of my side hustles, I was teaching dance in a lot of really good international schools in central London and in Surrey. Probably the best international schools in central London and Surrey. And I would teach there a couple of classes a day, move around the different schools. It was just, I was all over the place, basically. At the same time as that, I was working as a professional gift wrapper.
Oh, a professional
gift wrapper.
Okay.
Where that was more seasonal, and I would go to high net worth individuals' homes and I would wrap all of their Christmas presents, gift wrapping.
Wicked. Never even thought that was a...
Right.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I was...
That's so lazy. From them.
For them.
Not from you. Professional gift
I was
wrapper.
kind of dipping into a lot of different worlds.
Yeah.
And I was teaching at a summer camp one day, and I said to the head coach, ultimately, I'm not going to be returning in September because I need some more stability. I wanted to buy a property at that time. And I said, doing everything I'm doing, I'm earning money doing all these different jobs, but I want to be able to streamline it into one avenue, focus all my efforts into one thing, and just have more stability ultimately so I can get a mortgage.
Yeah.
And on the same day I said that to him, one of the mums came into the school and said to him, I'm desperately looking for a nanny. My nanny just handed her notice in. Do you know anyone who's looking for anything full time?
Yeah.
And he's like,
stars align.
yeah, Sian Louise, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Would you be interested in this? She was actually the mum of my favourite kids at the school and at the camp. So it kind of all made sense. I met them. They lived in Primrose Hill, met with them, got on like a house on fire with them. They lived between Primrose Hill and Israel, and they then flew me out to Israel for kind of like a trial run of whether this could work.
Yeah.
I'd never been a nanny before, right? So it was pretty mental. However, I had looked after classes of 20 kids, 30 kids at a time. So it was a very natural thing to go into. That ultimately is what piqued my interest in real estate, because going into mega homes in Primrose Hill and going into mega homes in Tel Aviv and things that ultimately I had never seen before, along with the gift wrapping and seeing another lifestyle that I'd never seen before, I was like, wow, there's a whole other world out there that I haven't yet tapped into. And it's pretty amazing that this is how people live.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking that role, had more stability, purchased a property. I was 24 when I bought my first place, which in this generation is quite an achievement.
Yeah. Where was it?
Where was it? Outside of London. It was probate beyond probate. Right.
Good value. Good value.
Good value, but I paid the guide price because I was the first time buyer and didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And when I say probate beyond probate, there was literally a stain on the floor from when the man had died, the previous owner, and he hadn't been found for 4 weeks. There was literally a stain in the woodwork.
Oh my God.
Oh my
and then you opened the front door and flies and smell literally
stench.
knocked you out. And every person walked into this house and was like, what is going on? And I walked in and I was like, this is amazing. What an opportunity.
Yeah.
They probably thought you were like some weirdo that just loved death.
I was just like, this is incredible. I could the house has got good bones. But that again is from like my parents taking me around properties and stuff like that when I was younger, and knowing the value of a pound and what you can do if you renovate a property and what you can ultimately get out of it.
Love that.
So I bought that place, renovated it, ended up renting it, put tenants in there for a couple of years. And it was at that point, I was about a year into the nannying, where I was still going into these amazing properties. I reflected on what could have probably been the worst purchase transaction and then rental transaction being a client. And I was like, hold on, if this is what agents are doing and this is how they're treating people, and this is then the real estate ultimately that some people get to see, I can do this industry. And with my acting experience and my million hustles that I do, if I focus my efforts into one thing, I reckon I could be hugely successful in this. So without any experience, I just went and put myself out there and interviewed for like 5 high street agencies. Got offered jobs at every one of them, but met someone at Douglas and Gordon, who I was super, super inspired by him in the interview. Absolutely loved him. He was probably your typical agent, tells you everything that you want to hear, but I was just like,
loved it.
I was like, this guy's amazing. And if I work with him, I'm going to make so much money.
Love that.
So yeah, that's ultimately how I fell into agency.
It's wicked. I mean, your whole personality just is summarized up. Like, you would throw yourself into the deep end of everything. I'm sure like even when your parents probably took you swimming for the first time, you'd just go down to the deep end and just throw yourself in. That was the type of character that you are.
Actually, have nearly drowned.
But I think it's amazing because you've had so much, 24, that was, you've had so much experience already then up to the age of 24, dealing with people, dealing with high net worths, dealing with kids, teaching. Like, there are so many skill sets in there, which the normal 10 people, 9 out of 10 people just wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
And how how valuable do you think that was? Like for the young people listening, and we have a lot of younger people, what advice would you give them in their early part of their careers in school that helps develop those skills?
I think it's just about being able to adapt to different people. You can't treat everyone the same. You have to be, you have to be aware of different cultures, different upbringings, everything in terms of how you interact with people. But it's also, everyone is human at the end of the day. So some people meet someone who is super high net worth individual and then change who they are because they want to match that person. Whereas I may put my P's and Q's a little bit more correctly, but I'm myself with whoever I meet. And that's always boded me really well in terms of my career. Something I haven't touched on, but I, at a point, was working in Selfridges and in Harrods and Harvey Nichols. And in my training there, they gave this analogy of this guy who came in one day and he looked super, super scruffy and he ultimately looked like he shouldn't be there. And a lot of the teams there turned their nose up at him. And then one of the people who was working there went up to him and said, can I help you? And serviced him correctly. And that person ended up spending like £20,000 in the store that day. So it really gives you that never judge a book by its cover, and you never know who you're going to meet. And for me, it's always the long-term play rather than the short-term gratification. I could meet you today and I give you advice, please do not sell your property right now because it's not the right time for you. But because I've said that, I know that when it is going to be the right time for you, you're probably going to call me because I've been really honest with you.
Trust you.
Yeah.
Trust equity.
And so obviously we're all products of our environments. As you said, you're where you are because of what you learned from your parents. So are you mindful of all your life lessons and how you then transfer that down to your daughter?
Yeah, God help her.
Love that.
She's going to be doing everything. She's going to be at the drama club in the mornings and the tennis club in the evening.
She's out. She is, again, because it's just been the two of us since she was 8 weeks old. Our relationship is super, super intense, but also amazing. She talks to me like she's my age and we have very grown conversations because that's just how it's been. Ultimately my role is to be able to present her with as many opportunities as possible, and then she can do with that what she wants. Super interesting actually, the school that she goes to, again, there's very high expectations on the children that go to that school. And I was in the playground the other day and one of the mums said, oh, well, my daughter has to be a doctor. And then the other mum said, yeah, mine has to be a lawyer. And I was like, really? I said, well, if mine can be whatever she wants to be.
Yeah.
And they nearly, their jaws nearly fell to the floor. And I'm like, what do you mean? How is she going to be able to sustain herself? Well, my role as her mum is to be able to provide a life that she can choose something she wants to do and ultimately then is hugely successful in that field that she decides to go in.
And she's passionate about it.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel pressure when you were younger or now, your parents running successful businesses, do you feel that pressure?
There was a point where, and my parents might get upset with me about saying this, but I'll talk about it. There was a point where a decision was made for me that ultimately I wasn't that happy with. And it definitely tiered my life into a certain direction and it could have gone a different way. So for context, when I was going to those extra drama classes that I mentioned about, the school was an American school and they had one office in London. It was in Tottenham Court Road. And they did this big acting convention once a year. And if you were selected to be a part of the elite team that's invited out to this convention, you then go and you meet loads of agents and loads of representatives and you're doing your scenes and auditioning in front of all these super influential people within the acting industry. And I was selected to go. I went and did a solo monologue. I did a dance thing there and I did a scene with this guy there. And our scene ended up winning the best seen in this convention of thousands of kids, right, in America. And it was amazing, and it opened so many opportunities. And we both were asked to sign with agents in America, really good agents in America. He was 21 at the time and I was 16. So he decided to sign and stay there. And my parents made a decision for me to come back and go to uni and do that route. He is now a megastar. And that's obviously not a route that I ended up staying in, but it's things like the pressure of going to uni and seeing that through. That was, I'm the first one out of my immediate family who has done that and come out of university with a qualification. So it's amazing, but it's also, I almost felt like I was doing that to please my parents rather than, if it was up to me at 16, I'd have been living in LA and signed to the agent and, you know.
Yeah, I can resonate with that because when I was younger, I used to play football. I used to play for Arsenal, and my parents took me out of the football system because I was missing too much school, and they opted to put me through education and I often think like, could I have been? What could I have been? But then I also look, and also looking where you are now, like you're inspiring people, and there's no guarantee that we would have made it. And if you go down that route and you didn't have the qualifications that you did have, and then you didn't make it, what would you fall back on? So I always think our parents ultimately end up making the right decision for us. They're a bit more experienced.
100%. And if you ask me now, not 16-year-old me, but me who's now a mother, and, you know, as much as I want her to be able to do whatever she wants to do, I am going to think of things very differently than being the person in that seat with all of these opportunities that are, oh, but what if? Ultimately, your parents want the best for you. So any decision that they make on your behalf is for the best thing for you longer term. And they're just here to protect you. So, you know, had I been 16 and living in LA, God knows what could have happened. It could have been a very different situation to the life that I ended up living.
So when I was doing a bit of research and talking about your time at Douglas Gordon, this was given to me from ChatGPT. It said your tenure was marked by your pioneering efforts to create flexible roles for working mothers, which I know is something you're very proud of. And I think it's something that the real estate industry fails at. How have you seen, you know, having been at Douglas and Gordon, going to KF, now London House, over that time span? What has changed? What needs to change more? Because I think it's slightly flawed.
Yeah, see, my time at Douglas and Gordon was amazing, but that's also because I'd put the hardest graft in and I'd been super successful there, right? So when it came to me going on my maternity leave and then coming to return back to work, we had a conversation about me returning to work because it was during COVID, right? So we had a conversation about me returning to work with my daughter in tow, right? So I was employed, but I was a broker. So I was working in sales and lettings, but on a basic salary with higher commission.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So my basic salary was still super low, but I was on a high commission scheme.
Yeah.
However, if I needed to bring my daughter into work, she was coming into work because at that point, sending her to nursery just wasn't really an option because it was COVID.
Too expensive.
Yeah. So they were amazing to me because I could do that. Then when my role changed and I went to be a sales manager of an office, the flexibility went quite a lot because I can't be running an office and having a toddler running around the office, right?
Yeah.
When I ultimately ended up going self-employed and leaving Knight Frank, it was more so I'm thinking about, okay, well, when I was at Knight Frank, my days where I was running two departments, I'm always like, you have to lead by example. So if I'm running a team, I have to be the first in, I have to be the last out the door.
Love that.
But that ultimately meant that I was dropping my daughter at nursery at like 7:30 in the morning and I was picking her up at 6:30 at night, right? So that's a long time for a small person to be in someone else's care.
Yeah.
Then when it got to the time that she was starting school, how could I physically do that? Do the school times where she's finishing at 3:30, 4 o'clock, when I'm still in that role of my day doesn't actually finish until past 6 o'clock. Yeah. So that was also a big factor in me ultimately going self-employed. But should that be a big factor in me going self-employed? No.
Mm.
But then what are the alternatives?
I was going to say, what can you do?
What are the alternatives? Because it's really difficult, frankly, for women, because when we are progressing in our career, in terms of timeline, naturally it's the time when we're actually the most fertile. So it gets to a point where, do you make a decision to have the family, or do you make a decision to do I've obviously seen your podcast with Jess. She's doing something like she's frozen her eggs and going on that journey. So she does that later. I never wanted to halt either. So I've just fought my way through life to be able to do both successfully. But that doesn't mean it's easy. And that also, I've had to go down certain routes, like going self-employed, so that I am able to continue being the mother I want to be and be the businesswoman that I want to be.
But I agree completely, and especially being a single mum, it's even harder. A lot of other people will be fortunate enough to have a partner next to them that could juggle or can work from home and pick up, etc. Being a single mum and doing that as well at the same time is like to the 10th degree, So first of all, you should be proud of that.
Thank you.
I don't know if I know you guys, I don't know how I would do it.
No, you can't.
I'm stressed to my eyeballs
super hard.
with
Super
what I'm
hard.
doing currently.
Yeah.
Throw into the mix a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And you're incredible. Sorry.
And then the educate, you wanted to educate them, you wanted to take them to school, you wanted to take them to the classes afterwards. And so then obviously at some point you decide, look, I need to go out on my own, and obviously you progressed into Knight Frank, you ran the offices in the whole of the Riverside for a few years. What ultimately made that decision for you to go, was it my career or was it your daughter? What was it or was it both, or how was that balance? How did that decision come about?
I wasn't that happy at my time in my life at that point.
Yeah.
And the kilter on that was actually my work environment at that time. So because that was kiltering out of balance, it was then impacting how I was as a mother. It was impacting my health. I was having health scares. I lost my hair. It got quite bad. And so that made me reflect on, okay, well, we're not living right now, we're surviving. And what do we need to do in order to live?
Yeah.
And so that was the ultimate decision.
Yeah.
It was risky in terms of leaving a salaried job and leaving a very good role. But when you have, and this is going to sound super corny, but when you have as much self-belief as I have, and you have, again, going back to the foundations of growing up in a business household and having side hustles and making things work and ultimately getting through what I've got through as a single mother, nothing's going to be harder than what I've already been through,
100%.
to be completely honest. Having a child in lockdown, in COVID, becoming a single parent when she was 8 weeks old, only being on 6 weeks worth of maternity pay. So literally hand to mouth for however long. No, nothing's going to be harder than that. So going self-employed and having to find a deal, okay, great. This is what I'm good at. I can find a deal. I have to pick up a client. Great. That I can do all of this. And if that enables me to then do every school drop off and do every school pick up and I have a happy little human at home, I'm happy.
I love that.
So given the fact that, people like yourself, people like Orly, people who are quite vocal about, being a mum in real estate, which I think is really important, and you ladies are leading the way. What advice would you, and again, Ollie touched on there's younger people that watch our podcast, but perhaps there's also people that aren't young who have children. What sort of thing would you say to them to give them the confidence to take that leap of faith? Because as I said, I think you are leading that way to inspire people to follow suit.
It's difficult because I have a lot of ladies, especially, that also reach out to me in my DMs, and they've had children and then they want to join the real estate industry after they've had children, which I think is actually more hard than the journey that I had, because I had a very good foundation in the corporate industry. I was a very good agent before I became self-employed. So that transition was easier as such, because I know exactly what to do, right? I would say that if you are looking to start out from a cold start as a mother, then it's all about networking within the environments that you have. My daughter goes to the school that she does because it will create a fantastic future for her, and it will give her fantastic education. But also selfishly, it gives me a network to tap into. And in terms of my listings that I have live at the moment, 40% of them are from the school network.
Wow.
Wicked. What a stat.
Another,
So you use your daughter for business?
Absolutely.
We've had that conversation.
as she uses me to eat her food. And
exactly.
Without generating business from those sources, I can't pay my mortgage.
100%.
I can't feed my child.
I don't think there's anything bad about that, by the way. We've heard about podcasts with me and Alfie and everything else. And ultimately, very much like your daughter is on your digital platform, she's part of who you are.
Yeah.
She's part of why people love you, and that's not a bad thing. And I actually think you've been super smart with, as I say, not just the education system with her and exposing her to different, demographic of people, but you can utilize that.
Yeah.
100%.
It's super smart.
Like, it's a great idea. Yeah. How else would you say for people now to build up their ecosystems, their communities? Like, what would you do if it wasn't, let's strip back and, okay, you haven't got your daughter and someone's out there now and they're like, okay, I need to start generating some business. I want to start creating my own community. What advice would you give them?
It's all about personal brand. People need to know who you are, and you need to establish personal brand from the off, right? This is like a crazy story, but back in the day when I was an actor, I was.
I love when you do that with your eyes.
Were you the lead? Were you the star?
I can leave the lead my autograph if you want. When
maybe we'll do a signed giveaway at the end. Get this signed, and if you drop a line in the comments, then.
No, but this sounds so ridiculous, right? But I used to do a particular pose, and the OG followers who are watching this will know the pose that I'm talking about, right? I used to do a particular pose in every photo, right? At one point, I was dancing on the stage at T4 on the beach in front of hundreds of thousands of people, and I did the pose.
Yeah.
I was dancing on X Factor, and I did the pose. I was with like every celebrity that I would be out, because I used to work in the nightclubs as well. I would do the pose. So it would be to the point of like, people who I didn't know would do this pose and send me the photos. It was like a trending.
What is the pose?
It was like
can you demonstrate?
We'll have to definitely at the end. We'll have to do a picture.
Pay me for that one.
Oh, come on.
Such a hustler.
But
it's like working that back without knowing it. I was establishing a personal brand because people knew. People be like, let's do the Sian pose. It sounds so ridiculous, but this was like at the time that social media was also just kind of really growing.
Yeah.
And I would have people WhatsApp me photos, tag me in photos on Facebook.
Yeah.
Everyone's out and they're all doing the Sian pose. Like that's just, and that's from back then, right? So it's all about personal brand, people being able to know something and know, oh, that's related to that person. You know, I get messages all the time. Whenever I see the power station, I think of you. Whenever I'm in Battersea, I think of you. Whenever I'm on the river, I think of you. Okay, great. That's because I've managed to create enough of a personal brand in that space that people come to me for advice on those things.
So were you building your personal brand, I assume, obviously with the use of socials, when you were at Douglas and Gordon and KF?
Even before that, I was building it from back when I was being a mother in COVID, and I was doing like more like Mrs. Hinch style stuff, cleaning my house, like literally doing all of that.
Yeah.
And so how did Douglas and Gordon take to you building your personal brand?
They loved it. They encouraged it because it was also helping business. They used to go into pitches with investors and be like, look, you know, there was at one point where the whole company were working from head office. So we'd all do, Douglas and Gordon was run by ex-Foxton staff, right? So it wasn't Foxton's, but it was run in exactly the same way with the standard call outs, et cetera, et cetera. So at one point, the whole company was coming into head office and we were doing call outs, and I was walking through doing videos of this and then putting it, you can see my old reels, they're quite embarrassing, but I haven't deleted any of that stuff because you can see the history and
it's wicked journey.
And the CEO told me, once, I was meeting with this investor and I showed him your reel, and, it was amazing. And he was so impressed that this is what we do as a call outs and everything. So they actually loved it. They used it as
Really interesting,
like a business
Good.
tool in order to help build and
Yeah.
show what we were doing. Everything I did even then was on brand, right? I wouldn't, maybe it's a bit slightly wilder than I'd be putting out now, but I wouldn't be doing anything that they wouldn't be, as a company, proud to show.
Yeah.
So that's something I've always been aware of.
Okay, so we've obviously done podcasts. We're a big believer in the personal brand, and we still obviously get so many people reaching out going, I understand I need to do it, but I don't know how to. What would your top 3 tips for that question be? The top 3 tips. Top 3 tips. How do I build my personal brand, Sian Louise?
put you on the
Top
spot.
3 is really difficult. I think the main thing you need to do is actually establish who you are and know who you are, rather than see Ollie and try to copy Ollie, or see someone else and just try to be a carbon copy of that person.
Do you think you have to be really comfortable in yourself? Because a lot of people out there now don't want to expose themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what we find a lot of people say. I don't have the knowledge to be able to talk about the market like you do, or I don't want to. I don't feel like I want to show people that when I do my ballet as a guy in the evenings. It could be embarrassing, but you have to feel comfortable in yourself to ultimately open up to your audience, don't you?
You have to feel comfortable, but also, again, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing, right? So if talking to camera isn't your thing, don't talk to camera. That may mean that your following will take slightly longer to grow, because people like to engage with people, and that's probably the easiest way to create engagement. But if that isn't your thing, don't try and force something. I actually find it quite painful when people do things that you can clearly see they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, if you are always just sitting in your comfort zone, you're not growing, right? So you have to, if you want to have 1 million followers on Instagram, do you really think you're going to do that by posting just pretty pictures of houses? No, bored. Everyone does the same thing. So there has to be something that you're offering your followers that is going to make them want to follow you, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's you, like my things I put out there are quite personal, as well as a mix of business. But that is because I remember that a lot of my following came from when I was a mum in COVID, right? So that whole personal side of things is a strong part of my following, alongside properties and clients, and doing that alongside each other. What can I offer people that makes them want to follow me?
And so, with obviously, as we know, being self-employed, there's 1,000,001 things that we need to do. What sort of, I know obviously Ollie said, what 3 top tips would you say? To phrase it in a slightly different way, what's your structure when it comes to social content and making sure that you're in people's faces? And that might be able to help people be like, okay, I'll do that.
I schedule all my content that's going on my grids and my reels.
Okay.
So there's always something constantly coming out, but my stories I do continuously. I'm a bit obsessed with social media.
Your stories are brilliant, by the way, but you're super consistent with it.
Consistent, but I've been like that for the last 6-7 years. So that in itself just builds, it's like an online CV, right? If you have followed me for the last 6 years, first you've seen the evolution of my journey, because I started out selling what I was selling, and now I'm selling what I am selling, right? However, you know that I am consistent, and I do this consistently, and I work hard, because you physically see it on my stories, and have done for the last however many years that I've been doing this. So to me, it just gives that piece of, if someone's thinking of anything to do with real estate and they're following me, I know they're going to reach out to me, because they know that I'll work hard and I'm consistent at what I do.
So what would you say to a young person that was like, nah, I don't need to do social media?
You need to do social media in any industry that you're doing right now, whether it's property or anything else, to be perfectly candid with you.
Why do you think that is?
I feel like a lot of the job roles are going to be replaced by AI. And unless you have a personality in your field, you are replaceable.
Yeah, it's super resonates with a lot of what we're doing.
So again, and that I 100% resonate with that. And then going back to what we're talking about, your daughter and what they teach in the education system, like I think your daughter is going to have to grow up learning about, and I don't know when, but AI.
Yeah.
And the whole internet and all of that, which I guess the balance is it's also a cesspit, right? And it can be quite a dangerous place for a kid to be roaming. Like, when do you find the balance to open your daughter's eyes to that side of things, which they have to be aware of to stay ahead of, well, not ahead of the times, but with the times?
If I've understand that question,
Yeah, I don't know
correctly,
what the question was.
Yeah, I just think that as a parent, like I don't hold anything back from my child. So she's taught to be streetwise. She's taught to don't talk to strangers, don't do this, don't do that. So why anything on things online would not be any different to that.
Yeah.
But also it's very different bringing up a child, and you'll get this in society today, even versus when we grew up. Because if I can't think of something, she's like, Google it, mum. Or if we've run out of butter in the morning, she's like, order some butter to the house. Like, what's...
We would never have had that.
We never had that, right? So it's just, they're in a very instant gratification generation, but also they believe that anything can be online and on the phone and they can research something. She will go on to ChatGPT and she will ask ChatGPT something. Like, that's just...
Wow, that is epic.
That's how... But then in saying that, I don't post her face online. I don't...
Is there a reason for that?
To protect her from the online community, right? I don't say her name online.
Yeah.
I don't put her speaking online because AI can morph all of these things. And there's just things that I'm aware of that I want to protect my cub from.
Yeah.
But I also don't want her to not be included at all because she is my life.
Of course, 100%. Okay, so the next section of our podcast is the quickfire questions. So these quickfire questions, we do ask for quick answers. Now, some people are better at quick answers than others.
We're the worst.
We're the worst. We're the worst at quick answers. But these are questions which we've been asked in DMs or people have commented on. So these are the public asking these specific questions that they want you to answer.
What is the most underrated neighborhood in London?
Ooh.
Straight in.
I would say, I'm going to keep it South London because for all my South Londoners, I would say Nine Elms.
Yep.
There's huge potential for growth, and there's huge redevelopment that is going on in that area at the moment that I don't think people are necessarily tapping into.
There could be a million answers for this, but let's have one answer. If you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
I'd be an architect or an interior designer.
Love that.
Not an actor?
No.
You used to be an actor. Coffee or cocktails after a big deal?
Ooh, I gave up coffee, so cocktails.
The best thing about your job in one word?
People.
Love that.
What is the most surprising DM you've ever received?
Oh, you're not going to want to know.
Give us a flavour. Give us a flavour. Okay. This was epic. This was really fun. Again, it's just another inspirational story. And so many people now will be resonating with what they're going through in your lives compared to what you've gone in your lives. And there is so many hints and tips and nuggets for the younger generation or people wanting to change careers. Like, it's been great. It's been fantastic. Thank you ever so much for coming on. Now, everyone who's watching is going to want to now stop the podcast and go and follow you and see where you are. Where do they find you?
At Sian Louise Tangney on all portals.
Which will bring up because it's a long one.
Which will tag as well. Which will tag.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Thank you ever so much. We've really enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.